The atmosphere in this packed legislative committee room was already charged when Judge Joe Brown, the former television judge known for his outspoken opinions, rose from his seat at the witness table. His face flushed with anger as he pointed directly at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. "Young lady," Brown's voice boomed through the chamber, causing several staffers to flinch. "I've been presiding over courts since before you were born. You have the audacity to question my expertise on criminal justice reform?" His voice crescendoed to a near shout as camera flashes illuminated his rigid posture. The committee members sat in stunned silence. No witness had ever addressed a member of Congress with such open hostility during an official hearing. The chairman reached for his gavel, uncertain whether to intervene. But Congresswoman Crockett remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable as she allowed Brown's outburst to echo through the chamber. When the room finally fell silent, she leaned toward her microphone. What happened next left Judge Brown speechless. In just 30 seconds, Crockett delivered a response so measured, so devastating in its precision, that the entire room, including Brown himself, sat in stunned silence. It wasn't just what she said, but how she said it that transformed the confrontation into a masterclass in professional composure. Before diving into this remarkable exchange that's been viewed over 12 million times, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more analysis of the pivotal moments shaping America's political landscape. This confrontation reveals something essential about how public discourse should work, even in our divided times. Judge Joe Brown arrived at the congressional hearing with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding respect. At 76, the former television personality and Memphis judge carried himself with the authoritative bearing developed over decades in courtrooms both real and televised. His dark suit and bold tie projected the image he had carefully cultivated over his career: tough, no-nonsense, and unapologetically outspoken. The cameras followed him as he made his entrance to the House Judiciary Committee hearing on criminal justice reform, examining racial disparities in sentencing. Brown had been invited as a witness because of his extensive experience in the criminal justice system, though many questioned whether his confrontational style was appropriate for congressional testimony. Judge Brown brings decades of direct experience with our courts, the Republican congressman who had requested his appearance explained during introductions. His perspective is vital to this conversation. Brown nodded confidently, arranging his prepared remarks before him. His television career had made him a household name, and he clearly expected his opinions to carry significant weight in these proceedings. Across the committee dais sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, representing Texas's 30th congressional district. At 42, the second-term representative had quickly established herself as a rising star in Congress. Her background as a criminal defense attorney and civil rights lawyer before entering politics gave her particular expertise on the hearing's subject matter. Crockett's royal blue suit provided a striking contrast to the wood-paneled chamber. Unlike Brown, whose fame came from television dramatics, Crockett had built her reputation representing clients in actual criminal courtrooms throughout Texas, fighting against the very disparities this hearing was examining. The fundamental difference in their approaches to criminal justice was apparent even before questioning began. Brown's opening statement emphasized personal responsibility and respect for authority, while suggesting that cultural factors were primarily responsible for disparities in sentencing. Crockett listened intently, making occasional notes but showing no visible reaction to even his most provocative statements. "The problem isn't the system," Brown declared with finality. "The problem is the breakdown of family structure and lack of respect for the law." When Crockett's turn for questioning arrived, she began with professional courtesy. "Thank you for your testimony, Judge Brown. I appreciate your long career in the justice system." Her tone was respectful but direct. "I'd like to explore some of the claims you've made about sentencing disparities." Brown nodded, clearly expecting deferential questions. "You stated that disparities in sentencing are primarily explained by prior records and case specifics, rather than any systemic issues. Are you familiar with the 2022 United States Sentencing Commission report that controlled for those factors and still found significant disparities based on race?" Brown shifted in his seat. "Young lady, Reports can say anything their authors want them to say. I'm telling you what I've seen with my own eyes over decades in actual courtrooms. I understand personal experience is valuable, Crockett responded evenly. But empirical data across thousands of cases might provide broader insights than individual observation. Wouldn't you agree? Brown's expression darkened. What I agree is that too many young legislators without real-world experience rely on academic reports instead of common sense. The committee room tensed as attendees recognized the growing hostility in Brown's tone. Crockett remained composed, consulting her notes before continuing. Judge Brown, you mentioned your experience in Memphis courts. Are you aware that Tennessee has one of the highest racial disparities in sentencing according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics? Brown's jaw tightened visibly. Those statistics don't account for the realities on the ground. This is exactly what's wrong with our conversation about justice today. People who've never sat behind the bench lecturing those of us who have. What's your experience with the criminal justice system? Have you noticed unequal treatment in courts in your community? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. The ornate hearing room grew increasingly tense as Crockett continued her methodical questioning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust particles in the air between the Congresswoman and the increasingly agitated former judge. Judge Brown, I'd like to discuss your statement that, and I quote, disparities disappear when you account for prior criminal history. The Brennan Center's 2023 study found that even first-time offenders show significant sentencing disparities. How do you reconcile that with your claim? Brown's posture stiffened. The Brennan Center is a notoriously biased organization pushing a particular agenda. Would you consider the United States Sentencing Commission biased as well? Their findings align with the Brennan Center, Crockett noted, sliding a document forward. What I consider, Brown said, his voice rising slightly, is that people who haven't worked in courtrooms shouldn't be so quick to judge those who have. Crockett maintained her composed demeanor. To clarify, Judge Brown, before coming to Congress, I served as a criminal defense attorney for 12 years, representing clients in courtrooms throughout Texas. I've witnessed these disparities firsthand. Brown waved his hand dismissively. A defense attorney has a particular perspective, Congresswoman. It's not the same as being a judge. That's true, Crockett acknowledged. Defense attorneys see the human impact of sentencing decisions in ways judges sometimes don't. We follow our clients' lives long after sentencing. The chairman interjected. The gentlewoman from Texas has 3 minutes remaining. Crockett nodded. Judge Brown, in your written testimony, you cited crime statistics from 1998 to support your position. Are you aware that those statistics have been widely discredited and that the Department of Justice issued a formal correction to that report in 2001? Brown's expression darkened further. I'm citing the original report, not the politically motivated correction that came later. The correction wasn't political, it was mathematical, Crockett responded. The original report contained a significant computational error that skewed the results. This is documented in the department's own review. Several committee members leaned forward, sensing the escalating tension. Brown's face had grown increasingly flushed. Judge Brown, one final question, Crockett continued. You stated earlier that you believe the primary issue is, quote, lack of respect for authority. Yet studies consistently show that perception of fairness in the justice system actually increases respect for authority. Wouldn't addressing documented disparities potentially increase the very respect for authority you're advocating for? That was the breaking point. Brown slammed his hand on the table. Young lady, he boomed, rising halfway from his seat, I've been presiding over courts since before you were born. You have the audacity to question my expertise on criminal justice reform? The outburst echoed through the chamber. Committee members exchanged alarmed glances, and the chairman reached for his gavel. Brown continued his tirade, his voice growing louder with each sentence. I've seen thousands of cases. I've made tough decisions while academics and politicians second-guessed from the sidelines. I will not sit here and be lectured about justice by someone who spent more time in committee rooms than courtrooms. The chairman struck his gavel several times. The witness will compose himself and remember where he is. Brown remained standing, pointing directly at Crockett. I know exactly where I am. I'm in a hearing that's more concerned with pushing an agenda than hearing from those with real experience. This is precisely what's wrong with Washington. Theory over practice, narrative over reality. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Congresswoman Crockett, waiting for her response to this extraordinary breach of decorum. As Brown's outburst echoed through the chamber, Crockett remained perfectly still, her expression neutral as she allowed the moment to settle. The contrast between Brown's emotional display and her composed demeanor was striking. When she finally leaned toward her microphone, the entire room held its breath. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice measured and clear. "First, I want to acknowledge Judge Brown's long career in the justice system. Experience matters, and his perspective is valuable to this committee." She paused briefly, arranging several documents before continuing. "Judge Brown, you mentioned your experience as a judge in Memphis. I have here the sentencing records from your final 3 years on the bench before your television career began." Brown's expression shifted from anger to surprise as Crockett held up the document. "These public records show that in cases with nearly identical facts and criminal histories, you sentenced African American defendants to terms averaging 26% longer than their white counterparts. This isn't my interpretation. It's simple mathematics based on your own judicial record." The room fell completely silent. Several committee members leaned forward, visibly stunned by this revelation. "I'm not questioning your experience, Judge Brown," Crockett continued, her voice still remarkably even. "I'm simply noting that experience without reflection can sometimes reinforce the very problems we're trying to solve." She turned a page in her notes. "You suggested I lack courtroom experience. Before joining Congress, I represented over 800 criminal defendants in Texas courts. Many were first-time offenders who received sentences dramatically longer than others charged with identical crimes. The very disparity you claim doesn't exist." Brown sat motionless, the anger draining from his face as Crockett continued. "You mentioned respect for authority. I agree that's important. But authority earns respect through fairness and accountability, not simply by demanding it. When citizens see justice applied unequally, respect for institutions naturally erodes." Crockett looked directly at Brown, her tone shifting from professional to genuinely empathetic. "Judge Brown, this isn't about discounting your experience or contributions. It's about acknowledging that our justice system, like all human institutions, has flaws we must address honestly. Recognizing these flaws isn't an attack on the system. It's a necessary step toward improving it." She gestured toward the gallery where several community members who had shared their experiences with the justice system were seated. "The people behind you aren't statistics or academic theories. They're Americans whose lives have been directly impacted by sentencing disparities. Their experiences deserve the same respect and consideration as yours." The chairman, recognizing the powerful shift in the hearing's dynamics, did not interrupt despite Crockett exceeding her allotted time. "We can acknowledge both your years of service and the documented evidence of disparities in our system. Both can be true simultaneously. Addressing one doesn't diminish the other." As she concluded, the room remained silent for several seconds. Brown, whose anger had completely subsided, looked down at the table before him. When he finally spoke, his tone had transformed. "Congresswoman," he said quietly, "I appreciate your direct approach. Perhaps there are statistics I should review more carefully." The gallery erupted in murmurs of surprise at this unexpected concession. Several committee members exchanged glances, recognizing they had witnessed something remarkable. Not just a powerful response to an outburst, but a moment of potential bridge building across a deeply divided issue. Crockett nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Judge. I believe this committee would benefit greatly from your insights once we establish a common factual foundation." As questioning moved to the next representative, the energy in the room had fundamentally changed. What had begun as confrontation had transformed, through Crockett's measured response, into something approaching genuine dialogue. Legal analysts watching the proceedings immediately recognized the significance of the exchange. "What we just witnessed," noted a CNN commentator, "wasn't political theater or gotcha politics. It was a masterclass in how to respond to hostility with facts and respect without backing down from principle." The impact of the Brown-Crockett exchange extended far beyond that hearing room. Within hours, clips of the confrontation and Crockett's measured response spread across social media platforms. Class versus chaos became a trending topic as millions watched the stark contrast between Brown's emotional outburst and Crockett's composed rebuttal. News outlets across the political spectrum covered the exchange, with headlines focusing on the unexpected turn. Judge Joe Brown's hearing outburst meets its match in Reverend Crockett's calm response, Washington Post. Confrontation turns to conversation in remarkable Judiciary Committee moment, The Hill, and How Crockett Turned Conflict to Constructive Dialogue, CNN. What captured public attention wasn't just the confrontation itself, but the rare moment of potential consensus that followed. In a political era defined by escalating hostility, Crockett's approach, firm on facts but respectful of experience, offered a glimpse of a different way to approach difficult conversations. Most surprisingly, Judge Joe Brown himself addressed the exchange the following morning on a national news program. Rather than doubling down or making excuses, he showed unexpected reflection. "I've spent decades being the toughest voice in the room," he acknowledged. "Yesterday, I learned that the strongest voice isn't always the loudest. Congresswoman Crockett came with facts, not just opinions, and I respect that even when I might disagree with some of her conclusions." Brown went further, admitting something few expected. "When she presented my own sentencing records, that was a moment of real reckoning. I've always prided myself on fairness, but numbers don't lie. I'm going to be looking more closely at those patterns." For Crockett, the aftermath brought opportunities and responsibilities. Interview requests poured in from major networks, but she chose carefully, focusing on discussions about criminal justice reform rather than the confrontation itself. "What happened in that hearing room isn't about personalities," she explained during a CBS interview. "It's about how we approach difficult conversations about justice in America. We can acknowledge problems in our system without demonizing those who work within it. Judge Brown and I may have approached this from different perspectives, but we both care deeply about justice." The impact extended beyond media coverage. 3 weeks after the hearing, an unexpected development occurred. Judge Brown and Congresswoman Crockett announced they would co-host a series of community forums on criminal justice reform in cities across America, bringing together judges, defense attorneys, prosecutors, and community members for honest conversations about disparities and solutions. "This started with confrontation, but it doesn't have to end there," Brown stated at the announcement. "The Congresswoman and I have different perspectives, but we've found some common ground in the need for data-driven approaches to these issues." Law schools began using the exchange in classes on legal ethics and advocacy, analyzing Crockett's approach as an example of effective communication in high-pressure situations. "What made her response so powerful," noted Professor James Harrington of Howard University Law School, "wasn't just the factual foundation, but the way she maintained respect for Judge Brown's experience while challenging his conclusions. She demonstrated that accountability doesn't require humiliation." Criminal justice organizations noted a measurable increase in public interest following the exchange. The Sentencing Project reported a 300% increase in downloads of their research on disparities, and several state legislatures announced renewed examination of their sentencing guidelines. 6 months later, when the House Judiciary Committee released its report on sentencing reform, it included contributions from both Crockett and Brown. The report acknowledged disparities while also addressing Brown's concerns about community factors, creating a more nuanced approach that gained surprising bipartisan support. "What began as a heated moment actually produced better policy," observed the committee chairman. "When we got past the confrontation to actual dialogue, we found areas of consensus nobody expected." For the American public, particularly those who had grown cynical about political discourse, The exchange offered something valuable: evidence that confrontation could lead to conversation, rather than merely more conflict. Comment sections across political websites revealed viewers from diverse perspectives expressing appreciation for how the situation unfolded. "I came expecting another partisan food fight," wrote one commenter. "I stayed for a lesson in how adults should handle disagreement." Media analysts noted that the Brown-Crockett forums drew audiences that crossed typical political divides. "People are hungry for substantive dialogue that doesn't devolve into shouting," explained a media researcher. What started as a viral confrontation has evolved into something much more significant: a template for productive engagement on difficult issues. For Crockett herself, the experience reinforced her approach to public service. "In Congress, it's easy to mistake volume for effectiveness," she reflected in a later interview. "But real progress usually happens when we lower the temperature enough to actually hear each other." When asked if she had anticipated Brown's transformation from antagonist to ally, she smiled. "I approached that hearing hoping for productive dialogue, not a viral moment." Judge Brown deserves enormous credit for being willing to reconsider some long-held positions. That takes more courage than doubling down ever does. The legacy of the exchange ultimately wasn't about who won a confrontation, but about how unexpected moments can sometimes create openings for progress. What began with anger ended with something increasingly rare in American public life: people with different perspectives finding ways to work together on shared concerns. "The most powerful response to hostility isn't matching it," Crockett noted during the third community forum. "It's transcending it by staying focused on what actually matters. In this case, creating a justice system that truly lives up to its name." If you found this analysis valuable, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're committed to bringing you thoughtful breakdowns of the moments that truly matter in American discourse. How do you think we should respond when conversations become heated? Share your thoughts in the comments below.